Alright everyone, unfortunately it's time for a special video, and this was predictable as soon as Joe Biden decided to insert himself into the situation. Kabul has now fallen to the Taliban. Afghanistan is now under the control, tens of millions of people's lives under the control of Islamic extremism. This was predictable because the second that Biden decided to go back on the U.S. word, which was the initial withdrawal deal, which was pegged for May 1st, this was brokered by Trump and Pompeo. It was almost inevitable that the Taliban would use this as a propaganda tactic. What a lot of people don't understand, and I'm sure a lot of Biden voters, they'll get cognitive dissonance and they won't even think about this. If you're doing diplomacy with an unstable third world nation in which you have installed essentially a puppet regime, that puppet regime loses all credibility whatsoever, and this is why the Afghan forces largely haven't even bothered to fight the Taliban. This is why the Taliban took over the country in less than a month. The legitimacy is gone when you go back on your word. This isn't to say the Taliban are good guys, the Taliban are right, or anything like that. That doesn't even play a role in diplomacy. What Joe Biden did was he wanted to deny the title of the man who ended the Afghan war, America's longest war, and all of this other stuff to Trump. And so he decided to push the withdrawal date back. It did not matter to him one iota whether this happened or whether it was okay and Afghanistan remained stable. He figured he can take credit if it does remain stable, which of course it hasn't, and if things go wrong, well, Orange Man bad. Orange Man shouldn't have brokered a withdrawal. We should have just stayed there for the next 100 years. There are pictures now coming out of Kabul that look exactly like the fall of Saigon, with Chinook helicopters evacuating embassy personnel as the Taliban marches unopposed through the streets of Kabul. Why? Because the Afghan government has lost legitimacy. Here's the problem with pushing the date back. The U.S. installed the Afghan government. At least that's the conception that the average Afghan has. I'm not surprised when I see crowds of thousands of people in Kabul cheering the Taliban. It doesn't surprise me in the least. Because what happened is that when Joe Biden went back on the date, he handed fodder to the Taliban to go into the hinterlands and talk to the tribal warlords, talk to the tribal leaders, talk to people who are more arguably ethno-nationalistic and say, look, Uncle Sam is disrespecting you. Uncle Sam is not leaving. The government of Afghanistan refused to push back against the withdrawal being in turn pushed back. Therefore, they're not legitimate. And then, despite pushing the date back, Joe Biden decided to leave all the armor, all the ammunition, all the weapons, drones, munitions of every conceivable type, armored Humvees, APCs, various fighting vehicles, field cannons, everything you could conceive of as the U.S. military fielding was left behind at air bases in the region for the Taliban. Now, here's what I would question. Donald Trump brokered a withdrawal. Biden, the second he took office in his asterisk administration, his illegitimate regime, because he's completely off his rocker and not making his own decisions. The only caveat to his responsibility is his dementia. He knew he had several months to withdraw. What did he do? Did he set up a plan to remove all of that material from those bases, at least to get them into Kabul so that they wouldn't fall into the hands of the Taliban, or did he basically just abandon them? He abandoned them. He pushed back the withdrawal date by several months. Given those extra months, what did he do? Did he make sure that the interpreters, the Afghan interpreters, would be airlifted out in a timely fashion, that the Afghani government would be defended, that Kabul wouldn't fall, that the U.S. goods would be removed? Or did he go and take a vacation? He just got off a couple of days ago an extended, week-long week vacation in Delaware. He's not even concerned with the goings-ons. He hasn't even addressed them. He came out on CNN the other day and said, no, I don't take any responsibility for what's going on in Afghanistan. Come on, man. It ain't my fault. My priority is the security of the American people. How does it make the United States more secure to have Afghanistan seamlessly fall to the Taliban of all forces? Yeah, I know we worked with them back in the 70s and 80s under Carter and Reagan when they were fighting the Soviets. Now they're not fighting the Soviets because they don't exist anymore. Now they're fighting the United States. By the way, who can blame them? I'm not going to say, well, the Taliban's right or anything. That's not what I'm saying. Who can blame them? A lot of these people you see cheering and fighting aren't even Taliban. They're just tired of it. We've been there for 20 years. We've accomplished literally nothing. We had a glimmer of hope under Trump that we could withdraw. And that because of the concept of diplomacy and deal-making as it exists in a place like Afghanistan, Trump knows this. He knows Asian politics. He knows business and deal-making. He went in, he and Pompeo, they signed an agreement that the Taliban itself signed on to. Had we withdrawn on May 1st, you wouldn't see this going on right now. All these people saying, well, Trump is the one that wanted to withdraw and it's not Biden's fault. Yes, it is. Let me explain something to you culturally that most Americans and Westerners in general don't know. If you've studied anything about foreign cultures, especially in modern affairs, you'd know this. You do not go back on your word once the deal is inked. That's a way to give at least propaganda to your enemy or to some hostile force that you've made a tentative agreement with. Had we left on May 1st, the Taliban would not be able to say, well, Uncle Sam's staying here, we have to fight and we have to take over Kabul, because the Afghan government would still have legitimacy. The Afghan government, do you think the Taliban gives a shit who governs Afghanistan in the civic sense, whether they do it directly or whether it's the Afghan government? No, as long as it plays by the rules, as long as that cultural aspect is respected. What did Joe Biden do? Completely threw that aside. Joe Biden needs to be uniquely and singularly, as the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Armed Forces, in name, I realize, but that is his official, legal, civic role. He needs to be held accountable for this. He should be impeached and removed from office for this importunity. Kamala Harris should probably be removed too, along with all of the others below them. Will it happen? No, because there's no longer any accountability, because he can just shrug and say, well, I'm demented. I was in Delaware at the time. I don't have anything to do with what goes over there in Kabul, goes on over there. So when you see homosexuals tossed from buildings, when you see women getting burqa'd up and enslaved, when you see child trafficking, when you see every other element of instability that was already there before we entered Afghanistan and will be there long after, blame Joe Biden, because he's the only person where the buck stops who can be fully held accountable. Military brass, they take marching orders from him, technically speaking. In the civic sense, in the official legal capacity, they listen to him. The Afghan government, they were relying upon the U.S. Hey, we need help. We're not going to be able to govern the fucking country. A peace deal was achieved. Just all you have to do, all Biden had to do was stick to the withdrawal, but here's why he didn't. He decided to push it back to possibly September, although it ended up being in the beginning of August. He did that to deny Trump one important thing, to deny him the title of the man who ended America's longest war. This is all propaganda. All it is politics. The Afghan people don't mean anything to Joe Biden. He doesn't care whether every single man, woman, and child in that country is burned to death. He does not care. He doesn't care about the American people either, but that's a separate issue. He only cared that Trump couldn't take credit for ending the war in Afghanistan. And he didn't care when he made this decision whether the best possible outcome, which is things work out somehow, or this outcome, which is the worst case, which is worse than the fall of Saigon, and now you're going to see plenty of dissident purges. Oh, you're going to see lots and lots of executions. The legacy media won't show you them. I guarantee independent media will. It's all Biden's fault, because he just did it to screw Trump. And that's the long and short of it. By the way, Biden coming out, supposedly the Taliban's so terrible, he's willing to bribe him. Oh, please, leave our embassy alone. Let us reestablish relations. What a pathetic cuck. That's what Biden is. He's pathetic. It shouldn't surprise us at all. He doesn't make his own decisions. Again, this call was probably made by Buttigieg or by Kamala Harris. Somebody like that. Sheltered from the blame by the fact that Biden is the steward asterisk administrator of the U.S. military. So yeah, Kabul has fallen. It's over. The Afghan war has ended. Well, on paper at least. I'm sure we'll still be conducting airstrikes. Maybe we'll do it on behalf of the Taliban next time. Got to grow the opium somewhere so that China can refine it, turn it into fentanyl, and then inject it into the veins of American citizens so that we can keep putting people in prison as slave labor. Got to keep that prison pipeline going, says Joe Biden. After all, I was the architect of the 94 Tough on Crime bill, and Kamala Harris wasn't far behind in her particular position in California. This is what these people are all about. They don't care about you. It's funny because all those crying, starving orphans and enslaved women in Afghanistan crying out in pain, and then Biden wants to convince you he cares about the children. He wants to give them tax credits. He cares about the homeless. He wants to have an eviction moratorium. Horseshit. This dude doesn't care about anyone but himself. If anything, Hunter Biden's artwork display should have told people that. But there are millions of people out there who still support the dude. They've got such cognitive dissonance, they don't even see a problem with what's going on here. I've seen people, they're like, well, Trump is actually responsible. He brokered the withdrawal deal. Biden tried his best. Biden tried his best to renegotiate the deal. It didn't need to be renegotiated. We just needed to leave. All we had to do was leave and continue funding the Afghan government like we do every other third world nation to the tune of a few billion a year, and the Taliban would have left things alone. Why would they want to overrun the country? It's hard to govern things. It's way easier to just influence a puppet regime. The Taliban was perfectly fine sitting out in their caves and shit like that. Now, the borders of places like Tajikistan and Pakistan are closed. Kabul has fallen. You've got literal pictures on Twitter. There's a picture of a Chinook helicopter lifting off from the U.S. Embassy in Kabul. It looks exactly like the fall of Saigon. I hope that Joe Biden is remembered in history the same way like Gerald Ford was. I also hope that he's a single-term, unmitigated disaster. We can put him in the dustbin of history, forget he ever existed, and get competent leadership in D.C. That's about all. Peace out.